This segment is brought to you by Trap Chevrolet. We're always on your side.
We're going to talk about what the actual prohibition of the law is, what's permitted, what the exceptions are, how the enforcement's going to work, and then what the penalties are. So this is the violation. No person shall operate any wireless telecommunication device while operating a motor vehicle upon any public road or highway unless the motor vehicle is lawfully stationary. Simple. Okay, now let's talk about what a motor vehicle is. So normally when we talk about like a DWI law, for example, we know what a motor vehicle is, anything that's motorized. However, there's a lot of exceptions. So it doesn't include an autonomous vehicle. Does anybody know what an autonomous vehicle is? Does a Tesla qualify as an autonomous vehicle, do you think? If you look at the actual statute, 3259, where it talks about autonomous vehicle, we're talking about self-driving vehicles that are fully or high automated. So while a Tesla may have part of the autonomous vehicle definition, it doesn't meet the full definition. The statute requires that the vehicle be able to fully do the dynamic driving, which means that the vehicle has to be able to make decisions on when to stop, come to, full stop, how to park. And so what I would tell you is that as far as Teslas, that's not excluded from the statute. And then we have all-terrain vehicles, golf carts, vehicles propelled by horses. So we're talking about in the French Quarter, you have the horse-drawn carriages. That's not included in the statute. Pedicabs. So if it's being operated, by a human on a bicycle, those pedicabs, they're not included. And then motorized wheelchairs that are being operated by as the statute says, a handicapped person. So those are all excluded from the statute, and they're not considered motor vehicles. The other part of the statute, that when you look at this definition, it says unless the motor vehicle is lawfully stationary. So I want to talk about what that means. What is lawfully stationary? So if the motor vehicle is stopped, is in park, is in neutral, or is in gear, that is considered what? Stationary, do you think? So if the vehicle is stopped, but this is where I think it's important to understand what lawfully stationary. Let's say that the vehicle is stopped at a red light. Because the light is red, that's lawfully stationary. If the vehicle is stopped at a green light, is that lawfully stationary? No. So if the vehicle is stopped, is in park or is in neutral, and is in gear, but not moving because it's lawfully stopped, then the law doesn't apply. So technically, if you're at a red light, you can use your phone. That's what the law says. Because you're lawfully stationary at a traffic control device. What about a situation where law enforcement is investigating a crash and the vehicles have come to a stop, let's say on the I-10? Is that lawfully stationary? What do y'all think? Yes, because if you look at the statute, it says pursuant to law enforcement orders. So in that situation, people can use their phone. So it's all about lawfully stationary. If the vehicle is pulled over on the side of the road, on the shoulder of the road, and it's parked, that's lawfully stationary if they're doing something. Let's say that they have to pull over because maybe they need to input something into their GPS. That would be lawfully stationary as long as they're not violating another law. Let's talk about what is a wireless telecommunication device. It's not just a phone. It can be an iPad. I never knew what a text messaging device I didn't know that these things existed, but that's what this is right here. So basically it's a device that just allows you to text people without actually having a cell phone, like being able to call somebody. So it would be an iPad. It could potentially be a Kindle if you're accessing the internet. So basically it's any device that you can do any of these things with. It does not, however, include anything that's permanently affixed to the vehicle. So how many of you have a navigation system on your vehicle? So that is permanently affixed to your vehicle. That is not considered a wireless telecommunication device. So anything that's included in your vehicle that you can access is excluded by the definition. And then these are considered hands-free. Citizen band radio hybrids, two-way radio transmitters. So how many of you have been in a cab lately? Cab drivers get calls from dispatch, right? And they have telecommunication devices in those vehicles where they can communicate with their dispatcher. Those things that are included in those cabs are considered hands-free. Another thing that I thought was interesting, because it says electronic communication devices with a push-to-talk function. So that would be like a walkie-talkie. So that's what's included as a hands-free device. All right, and now we're gonna go into the actual, what does it mean that you're operating a device? So making and receiving phone calls. You cannot now hold your phone in your hand and make a phone call or receive a phone call in your vehicle. Manual entry of names and phone numbers. That's excluded. Writing, sending, or reading a text-based communication. So you can't send text, you can't look at your emails, you can't do anything else where you're holding your phone in your hand. Accessing, reading, or posting to social media networking sites. Somebody said, why didn't you include TikTok? I'm not a TikTok person, so I just didn't put a picture up there. But it could include TikTok, it could include LinkedIn, include any social networking site. This one. How many times have you seen people post on social media while they're driving, they're taking videos of themselves? All right, well, you can't do that. Accessing, viewing, posting, editing, or creating a video, photograph, or any other image. Not allowed. You can't be watching videos, you can't be taking videos, and you can't be taking pictures of yourself while you're driving, while you're operating that vehicle. Now, what about if you're stopped at a red light? Remember, lawfully stationary? So if you're lawfully stationary, even though the vehicle is in gear and your foot's on the brake, technically, you're not violating the law. Accessing or reading or composing or anything that you do with an app. I put the McDonald's app up there because how many of you use those apps to go ahead, or like Chick-fil-A, to place an order and then go pick it up? Well, you can't, anything that you have on your phone, any app that you're gonna be accessing, if your vehicle is moving, you cannot use it. Using any application or feature of a wireless telecommunication device. So anything that you're inputting. So one of the questions that was asked by me is, what if you mount your phone in your vehicle and then you want to use your navigation system on your phone? So like your app, your Waze, let's say. And if you have to physically input the address on your Waze, or you have to look up let's say I was trying to get here, right? Rendezvous. If you are moving, then you cannot do that. Now, if you do it before you get moving and then you mount it on your vehicle and you need to look at it, that's okay. Now, I think the question would be your navigation in your vehicle, right? Can you access it? Well, The law doesn't say that because remember, it excludes from the definition of a wireless device anything that's in the vehicle, but we don't have to worry about that because your car won't let you do it. If you're moving, it will not let you access the navigation system while your vehicle is moving. So if you're trying to enter something into Google while you're moving, you can't do that. Holding or physically supporting a wireless telecommunication device in either or both hands. Can't do that. Now, there are some exceptions. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with 32295.2. That's the statute that says you cannot use headphones while you're operating a vehicle. There are exceptions, though. If you have an earpiece just on one side, or like a Bluetooth headpiece, those are excluded. So you can use those. You just can't use these over both ears. Now, these, right, if you only had it over one ear, 295.2 says it's okay to do it. You just can't have it over both ears. It's just for safety reasons. The other thing that the statute specifically excludes is your Apple Watch. It allows you to listen and to talk on your phone while you're operating your vehicle. It specifically talks about a device worn on the wrist to talk or listen during a voice transmission. All right, there's additional exceptions. So if you see a crash and you need to call 911 or you need to call and alert somebody that there's an emergency or a traffic collision or something like that, you can call 911, you can call whatever, on the causeway. I think it's called Start 27 or something like that. You can call those from your handheld devices, and there's an exception. There's actually an affirmative defense that you can prove that that's what you were doing when, you got cited for violating the law. If you believe that somebody's about to, incur serious bodily injury, I don't know what other situations you would call, but if you're calling to get help for somebody, it's okay. Remember I was talking about the cab? If you're relaying information between a transit for hire, so the cab driver is talking to their dispatch, then that's excluded. But it has to be on a device that is affixed to the vehicle. Let's talk about the secondary violation, because this is not a primary violation. So if the use of the wireless device occurs in any location other than a construction zone or a school zone, then it's a secondary violation, which means that the law enforcement officers cannot pull that person over to cite him just for that. Kind of like the seatbelt laws were. I don't know if you remember when we passed the seatbelt law, it was a secondary violation. So if you saw somebody not wearing their seatbelt, you couldn't pull them over for that. You had to pull them over for some other violation of the law. Maybe they ran a red light. Maybe they were speeding. Maybe their brake tags expired. Maybe they don't have a license plate on their vehicle. Maybe they're doing something else, but you couldn't pull them over just because you saw them texting or using their phone while operating their vehicle. So be aware, law enforcement officers, that it's a secondary violation. There's a $100 fine. The fine can be cut in half if they do community service, if they have to do 15 hours of community service. For law enforcement officers, if you believe that as a result of that, let's say you respond to a crash and you believe that the person was on their phone, make sure that you note that in the police report, because it does double the fine, but the officer has to note that in the report. It has to be in the report. And it's treated as a non-moving violation. An officer cannot search a vehicle, search a person, search a passenger, access the contents of the phone, or arrest an individual as a result of that secondary violation. But then you can't pull them over for the secondary violation, right? So if you pull them over, there's a reason you pull them over. So let's say they ran a red light. If you decide that there's a reason to search the vehicle or the passenger, you have to make sure you cite the primary reason for the stop, and then whatever probable cause or reasonable suspicion you would need. Now, as far as an arrest, if the person has an attachment, a warrant, then you can. Okay, the primary offense. It is a primary offense if the violation occurs in a construction zone or a school zone. The fine is $250. The judge can reduce that to $100 with 15 hours of community service. That community service includes litter abatement, and it has to be done in a construction zone or a school zone. And it is still a non-moving violation. Now, construction zone. The statute 3259 does not tell you what a construction zone, but if you look at 3257, it defines what a construction zone, and it says it's a highway with construction, maintenance, or utility work activities marked by temporary traffic control devices consisting of signs, channeling barriers, pavement markings, and/or work vehicles. So if you see any of this, that's a construction zone. That's easy enough. School zone, on the other hand, is a little bit harder. Title 32, Title 14, they don't define what a school zone is. So I know a lot of law enforcement officers have questions about this. So school zones are designated by specific traffic regulations, and the state, the Department of Transportation, decides what school zones to put for state highways. Local municipalities, local governments, they're the ones responsible for deciding the school zones within their jurisdiction. So I look like this is 3651, which is the Jefferson Parish Ordinance for me, defines what a school zone is. And it talks about beacons and the signage. Terrebonne Parish has a speeding in a school zone. And I went back to look, and Terrebonne Parish, the Public Works Department for the parish is the one that's responsible for designating and putting up signs for the school zones. So this is important for law enforcement officers. And I'm glad to see Christine Russell, the DA, for your parish here, because I think she probably thinks the same way I do. You have to have signs. You can't charge somebody with a violation of something if there's no signs. So if your parish doesn't have signs in school zones, then they need to put them up. That's it. They have to have signs saying this is the school zone, this is where the school zone ends. Because if you don't have them, as a prosecutor, I'm not prosecuting that case. Because you have to give people notice that they're entering a school zone. Just because the sign is down and we know it's a school zone, but the sign is down, I'm not prosecuting that case. So make sure that the school zone signs are up, and if you're missing school zone signs, that they get placed so that you can enforce the law. There was another question too about preemption. The statute itself, if you look at 3259, it specifically says that state law preempts. So you cannot have a local ordinance dealing with wireless telecommunication devices being operated by drivers. If you have one, you cannot use it. As of August 1st, this law preempts all local ordinances.
This segment was brought to you by Trapp Chevrolet. We're always on your side.